The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
All right. Well, first of all, this is the first time I've had multiple guests on the same episode. So this is kind of cool for me. And Muhammad, I'll tell you, dude, that uniform hits different, man. I told Josephine Gilbo the same thing, and I tried to convince Greg Stoker to wear his uniform, but he's a little too leftist. He said, dude, I'm not wearing my uniform. I don't even think I fit in it anymore, but I'm glad you fit in it still. But hey, listen, everybody, we've got a very interesting episode today, and this is going to be probably one of the most real talk episodes that I've done in terms of guest interviews. And I've got a brother duo, Muhammad and Bilal Daoud, who are brothers from my home state of Ohio, which is awesome. Absolutely. Buckeyes in the house. Or I think, where did you guys go to school?
Ohio State. We both went to OSU.
Okay. All right. So let me lay out the land here, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. So these guys are very similar to me. They are first generation in America. These guys are Palestinian. I obviously was born in Iran. But what I love about having them on DSD today is you got two guys who don't have accents, okay? They are about as American as I am and as American as you are. They've grown up in the United States, but they obviously have their cultural, identity and ties to Palestine. And I got connected with Muhammad through Josephine Gilbo because of, their joint military backgrounds. And by the way, if you're not looking at this on Spotify or YouTube, Muhammad is dolled up in his marine outfit, I think is correct. And I'll have him explain in a second. But anyway, let me just finish on this. This Israel-Palestine situation is obviously it's ongoing. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. I really don't. And so what I think is amazing about what we're going to talk about today is, you guys are two guys that I can relate to and that I think everybody can relate to. And we just want some real talk, man. And I'm going to ask you some really tough questions. And I'm going to ask you some things that, honestly, I haven't been able to ask other guests because they didn't want to answer them. And they felt like it was almost an insulting question. So with that, let me give you a minute to kind of introduce yourselves. Muhammad, why don't you start out and tell us who you are, and then talk about your military background a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us on, Ray. So, as you said, I'm a Palestinian-American, born and raised in Ohio, a Marine Corps veteran, Ohio State graduate, and as a business owner, that's what I do for a living. I served in the Marine Corps from 2013 to 2017. I was with 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, based in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was a motor T operator, and complete, upon my, EAS, when I was honorably discharged from the military, did my studies at Ohio State. My military background, you could say, was pretty interesting, to say the least, considering the fact that not only am I a first generation American, but I'm a Muslim and a Palestinian. And there's just not that many Palestinians or Muslims in the U.S. military. That was interesting. That was a good and interesting experience, connecting with so many people in that melting pot. The military of in itself is a melting pot, just like the United States, just like the idea of the United States, which is something that I love. But, for many, I was the very first Muslim Palestinian they've seen with their own eyes. For many of these young men that came from the rural South or came from small other states that don't necessarily have a mixed demographic of people. So.
And what age group, like when you went in, you were in the Marines, right?
I was, correct.
Okay. So what is the age group of the average, I guess, I don't know, cadet or whatever you call it that enlists in the Marines? Are we talking 18, 19?
I was 18 when I enlisted. So it was between 18 and 22 years old.
Okay. And so this was 2013, you said?
Correct.
Okay. So at that point, let me ask you, I mean, did people care that you're a couple shades brown or that you were Muslim? Like when you went in 2013, because I think times are very different now. But in 2013, like, did young kids, do they give a shit about that stuff? Or like, was it like you guys were all on the same team because you were all in the Marines? Did you face any prejudice, any discrimination, any of that stuff while you were in the Corps?
I wouldn't say that I've faced or felt discrimination per se. I definitely had a lot of mixed emotions from people when they found out that my first name is Muhammad. Again, I'm sure you know in the military, everybody goes by their last name. So, when I got to know some of these young men, later on, some of them found out I was Muslim. I didn't just come up, out of nowhere and say, hey, everybody, I'm Muslim, until we got to know each other. And people started finding out that, oh, like he's a Middle Eastern Muslim man, he's Palestinian. And for many, they were utterly shocked, not necessarily in a negative way, but they were just almost, again, to them, the Muslims that they've seen their entire life, of those 20 years, 18 years of them growing up, was on Fox News, on CNN, and on, corporate media. So for many of them, when they saw me, I was the very first example of a Muslim. And by no means did I consider myself or tell them that I'm an observant. I am Muslim. I take the identity to heart. Proud, will die with the identity. But for many, they were just shocked, I guess, that a Muslim could also be a proud American, could also believe in the embodiment of the Constitution and what it stands for.
I think that's incredible. And honestly, I think that, what's cool about this interview today, and really what's cool about what you just said is, again, you don't have an accent. You sound like everybody else. And so even though they found out you were a Muslim, they probably were like, oh shit, I didn't really know what a Muslim was. I thought a Muslim was Osama bin Laden. And honestly, probably at that age range, their understanding of what that is along those lines. It, quite frankly, it's like, oh shit, you must be a terrorist. You know what I'm saying? And like, what is awful is that is the narrative, whether it's Fox News or CNN. I've talked about this a lot on my podcast. I have come to a point where I've realized the problem is those two extremes, those two extremes, which are crafting whatever narrative that they want to craft. On the Fox News side, it's the, Muslims are terrorists. On the CNN side, they want to craft the, Americans hate LGBTQ or whatever initiative they're trying to do. Those two extremes are what is dividing this country. And I think that is incredible of you getting into the military. You probably touched so many of your fellow Marines' lives and helped them understand at the end of the day, dude, people are people. We're all the same. And just because you look a little bit different, you may have a little bit of a different beliefs. At the end of the day, we all want kind of the same thing. So that's awesome. All right, Bilal, kind of give us maybe just a little background on yourself. And I know, what's cool about having the two of you is Muhammad's going to kind of give us that military perspective on a lot of my questions. You're going to give us more of like a historical perspective and, maybe a deeper rooting understanding of the dynamics of things, but maybe just take a quick second and just give us a quick blurb.
Sure. Name is Bilal Daoud. I also live in Ohio, born and raised, lived a bit of my youth in Palestine as well. I am a cybersecurity specialist. So I got actually my master's degree in Homeland Security with a specialization in information security and forensics. So I work with a lot of public sector and private sector type stuff. And my journey into this really kind of started from the moment that I kind of started understanding the news and history and where we came from, and going to cultural days at school and understanding, hey, hold on, all these other people seem to have their culture is pretty obvious, and mine seems a little bit more kind of nuanced, and it can be a little controversial at times. And so digging into that and understanding the history of that is honestly, it's fascinating. Some of it's sad, but regardless of what it is, I think it's one of the things that make us better Americans as well, is because we can see that from the other side.
Absolutely.
And so, we can see
Absolutely. I told you guys this before we got on the air, and I want to tell everybody this. I mean, if you had asked me on October 8th, 2023, point Palestine out on a map, I probably couldn't. If you had asked me, what is Palestine? I probably had no idea. My depth of knowledge on the Gaza Strip and the West Bank was probably from watching Fauda on Netflix, which now that I go back and rewatch it, it makes me mad. And when I didn't know anything, I thought that was like such a great show. So
I watched that show too, by the way.
absolutely. No, it was definitely interesting, but I'll tell you this. I've watched it post now that my knowledge base has been enhanced, and it hits very different. It hits very different when I watch it. It's kind of like if you watch The Matrix now, or Wag the Dog, or The Truman Show, and you've been awake the past 4 years and you've been watching our world, those movies hit different. They really do hit different. But anyway, my point is that, like, I've come a long way in my understanding of the situation in that area. And so let's start with this. I did an entire episode on the Balfour Declaration, which happened in 1917. So, Bilal, why don't you give us, I'm going to use today to kind of be like almost like a recap of everything as well. I think this will be amazing for everybody. But let's start there. Give us your understanding of the Balfour Declaration from 1917, and then we'll move to 1948.
Sure. The Balfour Declaration came at a time where it was still totally fine for colonial powers like Great Britain and France and others, where they felt very comfortable just drawing lines in the sand and giving pieces of land to other people that, had nothing to do with it. And so the Balfour Declaration was really just basically that in condensed form. You had a group of very rich and very influential Jewish philanthropists, business people, political types that had this idea of Zionism. And Zionism started well before the 1900s. So it started before World War I, in fact. And so it's been kicking around for a long time. There's been different versions of it. But the Balfour Declaration really cemented that and turned it into reality. And essentially what happened was Lord Balfour, who, if I remember correctly, was the foreign minister, I believe, of Great Britain at the time, wrote a letter to Lord Rothschild from Great Britain as well, basically promising him a homeland for the Jewish people in the Holy Land. One thing to mention also is in the Balfour Declaration, one of the very important lines in there is that homeland will not come at the expense of the current inhabitants of that land.
Yes.
So I just wanted to put that on the side there as well.
No, absolutely. And again, from my understanding, Lord Balfour, who was the foreign minister for England, which, by the way, England, that little shit country, has probably been the root of so much evil in this world and so much diabolical things. I actually think they then handed it off to the United States to be like the big dog after World War II, but we'll get into that in a second. But you're absolutely right. That's my understanding of the Balfour Declaration as well. They were not supposed to displace the current group of Palestinian people that were there. That obviously has not happened. We'll get into that in a second. And then the other interesting thing is, again, for anybody that's been down the matrix and that's been red-pilled or whatever they want to call it, this name Rothschild has come up so many times. And I think people need to understand the Rothschild family, the Rockefellers, JP Morgans, the Chases, all of these people, these, oligarch old school families. This is really what transformed into the modern deep state globalist that's getting a lot of attention now. Okay, anyway, I digress. Let's move to 1948. So 1917, we covered the Balfour Declaration, which fundamentally was BS that they even did that. That's kind of, why did Balfour get to give that land away? That's kind of annoying. And it speaks to how powerful England was at the time. 1948 to me is another defining year because that's really when the state of Israel was created. And I want you to give us your take on that. But before you do, one of the clips that I always like to show people and play people was President Harry Truman
That decision to recognize Israel is an easy one. I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea. And what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs. But when you go into a thing of that kind, the people you help most are the ones that get most angry with you. Both of them were against me on the situation, but as President of the United States, I paid no attention to them, carried out what I thought was right, and I had the support of the Congress, and I could do it, which is unusual in these days.
Who basically came on and said, I had to divide Palestine. And this is where so many people are like, oh, Palestine was never a country. It never existed. Well, then why is President Harry Truman, the President of the United States of America in 1948, on multiple videos saying, I had to divide Palestine. I had to create a place for the Jews while keeping the Muslims or the Arabs or whatever he called it happy. And so to me, I'm always like, there was Palestine. Here's Harry Truman saying it. Mm-hmm. But why don't you chime in on 1948, how that happened, what that creation was about? How did the state of Israel get created from your perspective?
A great question. 48 was the epicenter of quite a bit that was going on, especially in that region. Keep in mind that this was post-World War II. The vast majority of the Middle East at the time was being administered by the British and the French, who claimed those territories after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Keep in mind that the Ottoman Empire was an old world empire that didn't have borders and passport control and all of the things that we consider as part of what we consider a country. So I want to say this because of the fact that language is so important. And the Zionist thing of there was no Palestine, there was no modern state of Palestine with borders and passport control, because guess what? The entire Middle East didn't have a single country like that. This was the time where independence and nationalism was just starting to grow in the Middle East. So it's really such a diversionary tactic by saying, oh, Palestine was never a country. Yeah, sure. Well, was the Roman Empire technically a country? Right?
Yeah,
was France or Germany? Were any of these places technically? These were principalities and everything else. So the idea of what is a country has changed over time. And so that's the first kind of warning. If you ever hear that, by the way, that's the first thing you got to go and say, well, hold on, wait a second. Palestine has a rich history, a deep and rich and close history. It's been in stamps, the Jaffa cakes in Britain. Everybody knows what Palestine is. And as you mentioned, Truman had to split it, had to literally take people out of one place and say that this is going to be designated for a different people. And that's what we're talking about in 1948, was the displacement of the people that lived there for centuries. We're talking generations. Another common mistake or miscommunication or misdirection that you hear is, well, the Palestinians or the Arabs or whatever they want to call them moved out of the territory, and Truman brought in, or whoever brought in, the Jews from other territories, right? As if the Jews had originally lived there and that all of them had left and it was just empty, and then people came in, as if it's like a video game, as if people just move in big groups and no one is left behind. And that's just not the case. These people have lived there and have been attached to that land since biblical times.
Right.
And so that's really where it's important to kind of like change the dynamic and explain to people, like, all of this stuff about the Palestine didn't exist because back to, prior to 48, there was never a place. There's this copy pasta, as we like to call it in the internet world, right? Where people like to have this like big bunch of text that is like saved and passed around to each other. Oh, Palestine didn't exist. It didn't exist. There was never a president of Palestine. Show me the borders of Palestine. What were they? Right. You've seen it before. Everybody's seen it. It's always in comments and stuff like that. But it's a big misdirection.
Yeah,
and so that's the one thing to mention there.
Absolutely. Again, I end those conversations with, hey, if President Harry Truman said he had to divide Palestine, there must have been a Palestine. And then I also end it with saying, I don't care if there was no president or if there was no whatever. The people that lived there, that was their home, and they considered it Palestine. So we move on. Okay. I know 1967 was also a a very critical year because 1967. So from 48 to 67, it's like, I think the Palestinians were not happy, but at that time they had the entire West Bank, they had the Gaza Strip. So from my understanding, probably 60% was maybe Israeli Jewish occupied, 40% was Palestinian occupied. 67, that was a major war, and I think it was called the 6-Day War, if I'm not mistaken. You don't have to get into the weeds on this, but I do want to talk a little bit about what happened in 1967, because that's another, inflection year. We've got 1917, 1948, then 1967. So just give us a summary of what happened in 1967. So then from here, we'll fast forward all the way to 2005.
Perfect. 48 to 67, you had a mass expulsion of the Palestinians that were living within 48 Palestine, that was now Israel after the establishment in 48. Most of those people moved to the West Bank and to the Gaza Strip. Some of them moved outside of those borders into Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, some in Egypt, and then the diaspora obviously happened throughout the time frame. They did not have a representative right at the onset of 48. And so the first thing that the Arab countries around, because you have to imagine an influx of immigrants just showed up at their doorstep. And so now they have to deal with this huge refugee issue. And so the first thing they do is they go to the UN, they go, hey, these are a bunch of refugees. We don't want to have to, they're their own country, they're their own, or I should say they're their own culture, they're their own people. They don't necessarily jive with the Jordanians or with the Lebanese or with the Syrians. So we need to figure out. And so the first thing that the UN did is they gave them a recognition of them being a people, and they established UNRWA at the time and all of that good stuff. And so fast forward to 67, these refugees are still sitting in their refugee camps. Jordan is administrating the West Bank. Egypt is administrating the Gaza Strip. And keep in mind, they're administering. They didn't annex them because they respect the rights of the Palestinians that live there. And they realize that this is not land to be taken by the Jordanians or land to be taken by the Egyptians. They realize that those lands are claimed by the Palestinians. And so they administered them since the Palestinians did not already have their own official government, if you will. 67 goes by, and the Israelis commit and what they call a preemptive strike against the Egyptians, who they believed were planning a war against them. And so within 6 days, they basically took over the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, as well as the West Bank from Jordan, the Golan Heights from Syria. And they could only do this, obviously, with the firepower of the United States. And also at that same time, I'm sure you've heard of the USS Liberty. So as they were taking weapons and all this from the U.S., at the same time, they also bombed the U.S. battleship or an intelligence ship at the same time because they didn't want them to realize. Go ahead, Mohammed.
The Levant affair, where Israelis were trying to disguise themselves as Arabs, and they were essentially bombing American military installations again as flag attacks.
The USS Liberty thing, man, that's gathered some steam on the internet right now. And there's the guy Phil Turney. I'm sure you guys know he's one of the survivors of the USS Liberty. He's been making the rounds on the podcast. He went on Candace Owens's podcast, and that thing exploded. And he's been on the Burn Pit podcast and Jay Slay USA and a few others. I think he's been on Jake Shields' podcast. I'm going to try to get that guy on. The story of the USS Liberty is insane. All right. Listen, that's good backdrop. And I shared with you guys before, I know there's so much to communicate about this, but my goal with the audience today is we're almost using this as like a Middle East, Palestine, Israel for Dummies episode, where we're really just trying to get everybody to understand. One important point is that this obviously did not start on October 7th, 2023. And the problem is, for most of Americans, they think that's when it started. And that is not the case. This started, we've now taken it back to 1917. We've brought it to 1948. We've brought it to 1967. So now let's jump into the present. And I'm going to ask you guys, or I'm going to say something that's probably going to be the most controversial thing I've said. And I hope I don't insult you by saying this, but if I do, that's okay as well, because you can insult me right back. I think Hamas is fake. I've thought Hamas is fake from the day it happened on October 7th. And when I say fake, what I'm saying is, or what I mean is, I think Hamas is the creation of, I don't know, Netanyahu and the United States and whomever, and they are there to play the role of the boogeyman, the big bad wolf, the enemy. You know, they are no different in some ways than maybe what Osama bin Laden's role was, what Muammar Gaddafi's role was in Libya, what Saddam Hussein's role was in Iraq. I'm not saying those people are good people. And by the way, I'm not saying Hamas is good people. But what I'm saying is I don't view them the way that the American media has tried to portray them. And that is, hey, these are the guys, these are the terrorists, they're the problem. In my opinion, all of that is contrived in order to be able to have war, because I'm a big believer in the concept of the military-industrial complex. I think that shit is 100% real. I think it goes back to Dwight D. Eisenhower. I think that in part got Kennedy killed because he wanted to pull out of Vietnam. But then also there was the stuff going on with Israel and their nuclear bomb enrichment, as well as having to be organized as a foreign country. But fundamentally, I think this military-industrial complex is real. And so I think Hamas is like I said, man, it's a creation of multiple entities. Give me your thoughts on that.
Okay. You're half right, and I'll explain why. From 48 through 67 and onward into the modern time, the Palestinian resistance, there's always been resistance, right? So as soon as the Israelis and the pre to the Israeli army, the Haganah, initiated themselves and began attacking Palestinian communities, Muslim and Christian communities throughout the West Bank and throughout Israel proper, there's always been resistance. And so that resistance initially started off as just like, imagine if somebody came to your hometown and you and a bunch of guys have guns and they go, hey, these guys are trying to like break into our shit. Let's stop them. And it was just really kind of a neighborhood centric approach to things, right? After the 48 war, other Arab countries got involved in attempting to organize this resistance. And so there was a period called the Fidaiyin. And the Fidaiyin were primarily leftist organizations. So Fatah was one of the major ones that came out during this time. The PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a Marxist organization, also came out during this time. Some of the if you think of Delta Force with what's that guy's name? The Texas Ranger, Walker Texas. Remember his name now?
Chuck Norris. Chuck
Norris. Remember Delta Force with Chuck Norris, the movie from like Lebanon, killing all the terrorists and saving the Americans. Those were supposed to be the PLO, right? Those were supposed to be the leftist Palestinians that were, and so that lasted, and that was kind of the only resistance faction for up until Oslo, which we're kind of fast forwarding.
And by the way, let me jump in real quick. So the PLO, I have not talked much about Yasser Arafat. That's somebody I got to do a deep dive in. But geographically, and by the way, you know what I love about this, man? This is like, to everyone listening and watching, this is like three Americans talking about this, because I love the fact that you use Walker Texas Ranger, and we're bringing Chuck Norris into this. That's fantastic.
Good old Chuck.
But this is why I wanted to do this with you guys, because you guys are relatable to me. You not only to me, you're relatable to my audience, because again, you're dudes I have beers with on the weekend. And so this is why I really enjoy, man, I'm really getting a lot out of this. So PLO, Yasser Arafat, the one thing I want the audience to understand is the geography of the separation between Gaza and the West Bank. It's kind of like, and maybe you'll have a better analogy. Obviously, it's not nearly the size of the United States, but if you think of the map of the United States, Gaza and the Gaza Strip is California, and the West Bank is really the East Coast of the United States, like from Maine down to New York. Is that a good way for people to think? And there's a lot of space in between, right?
It's a very minuscule area, but yes, if you wanted to compare it in that way, yes, you're absolutely right. To get from Gaza to the West Bank is only about a 20-25 minute drive. It's a very small, the entire place is about the size.
From Gaza to the West Bank is only 20.
From Hebron, right?
Yeah, so the Jordan
it's very
River,
close.
from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean.
Okay. So we should think about, let's take the United States, which is shaped as a rectangle. Let's squash it into almost like a square or maybe a vertical rectangle. But still, I want the audience to understand, you got California and you got the East Coast.
You got it.
So Gaza's the West Coast. The West Bank is the East Coast. Because I do think people need to understand. Now, why do you think they organized it like that? Did they want a separation in the land, or was that because of biblical
it's the remnant
stuff?
It's literally the remnant of the 48 war, and so because with the 48 war, the Israelis were keen on taking the entire coastal region, Haifa, Tel Aviv, Acre, that whole area. That's where all the ports were and everything else was. And then you have Gaza, which is just this little tiny strip next to Egypt. And that was really just an area of high defense by the Egyptians. And so that's why it was saved. And a lot of Palestinian refugees from the coastal regions ended up there. So the vast majority of Gazans are actually just refugees from modern Israel, right? As for the West Bank, same situation, but it's a hillier area. It's the Judean hills, as they call it. And so obviously it was harder to essentially take over in 48, although they did make a really good and precision attack towards Jerusalem. And so that's why when you look at the West Bank, it looks like a big kidney bean. And there's like a big section at the top, and then there's like a little area where it's much thinner, and then a big section at the bottom, because they're really gunning for Jerusalem, obviously. And so to get back to your primary question about Hamas, so the leftist movements, were both in Gaza and the West Bank for the longest period of time, up until we said Oslo. So to answer your question, or to show how you were half right, the Israelis, and there's a great book called Hunt for the Engineer by Samuel Katz, one of the old Mossad leaders, or top dogs in the Mossad at the time. He mentions how they spent a lot of time essentially trying to raise the influence of these Islamist organizations, specifically the Muslim Brotherhood, which became Hamas. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Islamist organization. And they were doing that as a counteract against the unity of the Palestinian resistance under a leftist banner, right? They wanted to split that resistance, divide and conquer, basically. It's pretty simple. And so they focused on that. So where they were suppressing Palestinian resistance from Arafat's PLO or the PFLP or any of these other groups, they basically gave Hamas a free rein to essentially do what they wanted all throughout the 80s and up until Oslo. And so that's, they did. They created the boogeyman. But again, for the people that were supporting Hamas at the time, or the people that began to join Hamas at the time, they were doing it from a perspective of, okay, this other, either for religious reasons, they believed, think of like, you might have like a Christian nationalist, you'll have Muslim nationalist Palestinians, right? Where they believe that the only way that they're going to be able to take Palestine back is by doing it via religious means, right? By having that faith-based, resistance. But generally speaking, there was no difference between somebody that would join Hamas or somebody that would join the PLO. It was simply.
I know Hamas started in 87. So this is the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Like during that time, did they dress like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Like did they have covered up and all that? Because again, here's a little more why I just feel like, and again, maybe fake is the wrong word. And I don't mean fake in that they don't exist. I mean, there's like something nefarious behind them.
Some external influence, for sure.
External influence. That's a great way to put it. And the reason I think that is because from October 7th to today, I've never once seen a dead Hamas soldier on any of the stuff I watch on the internet. Every time they do a hostage release or they do like whatever, dude, their uniforms are like pressed. They look like they're immaculate, dressed to the nines. My buddy jokes around. He's like, that he uses a soccer football analogy. He's like, they have better kits than Manchester City does. And it's like, they always look, everything looks brand new. Everything looks pressed. So that stuff is why I'm like, this doesn't make sense. These guys look immaculate every time. They never show their face. I never have seen a dead Hamas soldier, but I'll tell you what I have seen: 1 million dead women and children, which is like so crushing to me, and it crushes my soul every time I see, especially a child that's been maimed or whatever. So I guess that's why I thought there was external influence behind them. I mean, do you think that could be plausible?
I think from a financial perspective, from a logistical perspective, I think it's no question that Israel realized, especially the right-wing Israeli governments, realized that we need to keep this boogeyman alive in order to continue the occupation, continue the besiegement, and all of this, to continue having that kind of persona or that perspective to the Israelis that, hey, all these people, they're demons and they want to kill you. And that's the only reason they're alive, is because they just want to kill Jews. As if we have nothing else to do in our lives but kill Jews. That's the thing that we care about, apparently. So, and I can tell you, people in Gaza, like Hamas, for example, Hamas is a political party. In 2006, 2005, right after the disengagement, when Ariel Sharon took out the settlers from Gaza because because the resistance in Gaza was attacking those settlements quite often, and they literally had to pull back. They just couldn't continue pouring resources in defending these settlers that are living amongst literally 2 million Palestinians. It's just not feasible, and so they pulled out. And so when they pulled out, Hamas decided at that moment, okay, you know what? We're going to switch from being just a militia, and we're going to get into politics. And so at that moment, they decided that they're going to, they created a new charter. They recognized Israel on 67 borders, not on, not the entire thing, obviously, but they recognized that Israel has up until the 67 borders, or the 48. Modern Israel is where they would go. And they joined and they won the election, all right, which was administered by funny enough, out of all people, Carter. Jimmy Carter, and he said that it was probably the most freest election in the Middle East ever.
What's funny about Jimmy Carter? So being from Iran, I mean, rest in peace, Jimmy Carter, first of all. But I can't stand Jimmy Carter because he literally was the reason Iran in many ways was ruined. I mean, he turned his back on the Shah and kind of ushered in the Ayatollah. And here we are 40 something years later with the same regime in Iran, and the people have suffered. But what's crazy is, of all the presidents of the United States, Jimmy Carter had the Palestinians back like no other. I mean, like, it is incredible how supportive he was of the Palestinian people and the regime. And then a lot of people think that's why he only was president for one term, because he didn't play along with the Zionist regime that many others, from Bill Clinton to the Bushes to Obama to, it didn't feel like 2016 Trump was that guy, but 2025 Trump is that guy for sure. And then Biden as well. So, okay. All right. On the Hamas thing. So fundamentally, you're thinking there's a possibility there's external things, but there's also legitimate, like you feel they're legit in terms of their being a resistance movement as well.
I think that they definitely have the popular support, whether we like it or not.
Okay.
The PA, the Palestinian Authority, and other, quote unquote, legitimate Palestinian groups. And when I say legitimate, I'm saying legitimate to the Western audience or to the Western nations.
Yeah.
They've been corrupt for a very long time. And in reality, right now, most Palestinians consider them as like Vichy France.
You're talking the Palestinian Authority, that rules the West Bank. Okay, let me put that on pause a second. Mohammed, let me ask you something. Like your military experience at that time, I don't remember. I mean, 2013 to 2017, you said you were in 4 years?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. I don't remember. Did things flare up
Briefly,
during that time? Okay, we have.
in 2015, there was they called it in Arabic Intifada de Sakakin, or it was mainly in the West Bank, actually, where younger men were essentially going to Israeli military checkpoints and attacking Israeli soldiers. That lasted for a few short months. I'm trying to remember if there were any engagements with Hamas in those years, between 2013 and 2017. It was probably
2014. 2014 for sure. Yeah.
And by the way, I haven't really used the term intifada, but I'm sure a lot of people have heard that term. Can you, Mohammed, just define that for people, what an intifada is? So from now on, when people hear it, they'll understand what that means.
Yeah. And Bilal, please chime in. Uprising against the occupant.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. It's basically like what you would consider, the Americans attempting to revolt against the British. We would have called that an intifada.
Okay. All right, everybody. So from now on, when you hear the term intifada, just know that
don't
that's
tread
an
on
uprising.
me, basically.
Yeah. Okay. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I know there's been two of them. This is going to be totally random, Mohammed, because now that I think about the time you were in the military, that also coincided with I know that was Obama as the president. And then there was stuff going on, ironically, in Ukraine with the overthrowing of Viktor Yanukovych at the time. I've talked a lot about Ukraine and Russia. Where were you deployed to? Like, where did you serve, and were you involved in the Russia-Ukraine stuff at all?
No. So my unit did 2 UDPs to the Okinawa, Japan, Korea. So we were in the Pacific mainly for those. I would say in my 4 years, I probably was deployed over there for a year.
Okay.
And then so we were focused mainly on the, under the Pacific Command, that is.
Okay. And so let me ask you this. Man, I'm really enjoying this, by the way, guys. I'm really enjoying this. What is it like being in the military? I mean, first of all, how hard is the boot camp stuff? Like, does that stuff just kick your ass? Like, how difficult is that? And then second question, when you're deployed, what are you doing? Like, what are you guys doing in the wherever you are on a day-to-day basis?
So there's definitely, it's got its own challenges, but I think that most people, the overwhelming majority of people that go into the military, they don't do it for the money. They do it, could be various reasons, could be family tradition, could be, their love for the Constitution and their actual intentions of serving their country, despite what the foreign policy may be or what the administration may be. But the overwhelming majority of service members, which I came to realize because of my time in the service, are just good-hearted American people. They are the sons and daughters of working class people. Secondly, it's a lot of training. If you're not in a war, if you're not in some sort of campaign, you're just training for the next war. That's essentially what it is. And usually when they deploy units to, say, Korea or Japan, they've been deploying units on rotations for the last, 60, 70 years, really, since World War II ended and since the Korean War ended. It's mainly just a show of force and show of presence. In the event of a conflict emerging, the U.S. is essentially there, right? Taiwan, for example, right? In the event that China wants to invade Taiwan, you have aircraft carriers and marine expeditionary units there just ready to deploy. So that's essentially what you do in the military. Like I said, it's just a lot of training and training.
Were you just jacked? Like, were you in like the best shape of your life?
Honestly, yeah, you do a lot of PT on a daily basis. You kind of have no choice, right?
Yeah.
You don't really have a choice. Otherwise, you're the one that's holding everybody back, and you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that person that's essentially, you want to be an asset, not a liability for your team. So
got it.
Yeah.
I get to ask all my stupid questions. So like, does like code reds exist like in A Few Good Men? You can't handle the truth. Like, is that stuff real?
To an extent, like there's certain things. The movies definitely, put this show on, right? This over exaggeration of what like the military culture is like. Boot camp is probably the most, strict, like closest to a Full Metal Jacket. If you watched that movie before.
Yeah, that was a great movie.
God rest his soul. Great guy. But essentially, it's very strict. They break you down to build you back up. And they do program you in a way where you stop giving a shit about your personal concerns as much as you care about the concerns of your unit, of your teammates. And I think that's something that's actually, it's a great thing, especially in a warfighting organization. You need that type of mindset, you know, you need to have that strong.
No, I totally get it. That makes sense, man. They break you down to let go of you as the individual and really put your unit first. I mean, you do hear all that stuff in terms of a lot of these guys. And I think that's what becomes the difficult part for a lot of military veterans that come back and try to acclimate into regular society, because regular society is the exact opposite. It's about me first and, you know, the unit second, third, or fourth, but like they've been reprogrammed to think differently. All right. Super fascinating. Okay. All right. That was good. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, guys, let's jump. Dude, this can be a 6-hour podcast, but I'm going to try to not make it that. Let's jump to what you think happened, and you're both welcome to answer. We'll start with Bilal. What you think happened on October 7th and what that was. And I'm trying to think, should I give you my opinion? No, I'm not going to give you my opinion first because I don't want that to potentially influence what you say. Mm-hmm. So Bilal, why don't you start? What do you think October 7th was?
I think October 7th was kind of the Palestinian psyche's final chance to stay a people, because we from the moment things things have been going bad for Palestinians as a society, basically ever since the end of the Second Intifada, which was 2005, 2006. Hamas decided to join the elections. They won in the elections. They decided they wanted to, be part of Palestinian society and just join in. And the Americans were not cool with that. The Israelis were obviously not cool with that. And so they decided that they don't like the outcome of the elections, and they've stopped aid to the Palestinian Authority, which I should say it's not aid as much as it is like they blocked their essentially stopped them from being able to collect their taxes, to collect their tax payments, and that basically destroys the country, right? So the government can't pay their workers, they can't pay anybody, and so therefore they're no longer a government. So, and that was made in order to pressure the Palestinian Authority to reject Hamas from the government. And so then at that point, there was a split. From there on, things just started going downhill for us because the Israelis were able to essentially split the Palestinian population into two. They put a siege on Gaza. And then for the West Bank, they just started building more and more settlements. And they've been building settlements ever since the 60s and 70s, but they really started building settlements. And so we started seeing, obviously, the land essentially being split off. And there's automated gates and tunnels that can be cut off. And so now we're basically living in these little reservations, these little cantons, as we call them.
Is this in the West Bank?
This is in the West Bank. This is in the West Bank, okay. Correct.
So again, for everybody to just visualize this, because honestly, I feel like visualization is necessary in this situation. Think of taking the United States, crushing it into a square or a vertical rectangle. Gaza is the West Coast, California. The West Bank is the East Coast, Maine to New York, let's say. And so these settlements are happening in the West Bank, so the East Coast. Our settlements really were not happening anymore in Gaza because, again, correct me if I'm wrong about this, the disengagement of 2005 was when all of those settlements were taken out of Gaza. Now, what I do want people to know about this, and I've talked about this on my podcast, is the amount of people that were taken out of Gaza that were Israeli in 2005. You're talking about 8,500 people, okay? That left 2 million people still there. So we're talking a ridiculously small percentage. The reason I want to bring attention to that is that's another one of these false arguments, in my opinion, that get made where we're like, look, we got out of Gaza in 2005, and look, they turned it into, underground tunnels and a bomb factory and all that stuff. But people don't understand when I think, and I forget who was, if it was Ariel Sharon or who was in Prime Minister of Israel at the time, that was strategic. They're like, hey, let's get our 8,500 out of Gaza. And then from what I've understood, that's when Gaza turned into like this open air prison where Israel controls the food that gets in, the water, they control the electricity, they control the medicine. So in my mind, I'm like, that was pretty smart. They got their people out in 2005, and then they just turned it into, an open air prison.
And they doubled down on the settlement building in the West Bank. So they took out the 8,000 from Gaza, but then they just started doubling down and pouring more. Now there's over 700,000 Israeli settlers.
They just relocated those, 2,000s from Gaza to the West Bank. And like Bilal said, they kind of used that as a smokescreen to show the world, hey, we've left Gaza. The Palestinians are administrating it on their own, even though they put a blockade on it. But then they were they went berserk on these settlements in the West Bank.
No, totally. Let me ask you guys this, because I had Elijah Kallenberg on the podcast. He's a young kid's like 21. He's a Jewish American, or actually, I think I just found out he's Canadian, but he's Jewish basically. But he is just such a well-educated, young man when it comes to this region and this area. And I asked him this question, and I kind of want to ask you guys this question. I feel like the West Bank has always been the crown jewel that they've wanted to have. And maybe we can now get into a little bit of, I don't know, maybe the religious reasons behind that. Does it have to do with Jerusalem? And then obviously, Jesus being born in Bethlehem, which I know is maybe a suburb, so to speak, of Jerusalem. But I've always kind of, in my mind, thought this is what they really want. They want the West Bank. They want Jerusalem. Gaza, yes, they want that as well. But that's almost like the appetizer to the West Bank being the entree. What are your thoughts on that? And Bilal, why don't we start with you, and then we can go to Muhammad.
Yeah, the West Bank is obviously, for like you said, biblical reasons. So Zionism comes in many forms and tastes and shapes and sizes, but the religious Zionists, the Messianic Zionists, the ones that believe in like the end times and believe in, that they have an actual role to play in bringing about the end of the world. They really, like you said, the West Bank is their crown jewel. Jerusalem is extremely important. They want to rebuild, or they want to build the temple, the third iteration of the temple on the Temple Mount, which is obviously one of the holiest sites for Muslims and Jews, and that's where the foundation stone is. Muslims believe that it would basically be a huge. You're basically having billions and billions of Muslims around the world enraged if you were to try to topple the mosques on top of the Temple Mount.
So that Temple Mount, where is that thing?
That's in the middle of the old city of Jerusalem. That's right.
Middle of the old city of Jerusalem. And then is that Al-Aqsa Mosque is sitting on top of that?
That's correct. That's called the Noble Sanctuary, as we call it, Al-Haram.
Okay.
And we believe that it was also the seating place of Solomon, who, again, we believe as Muslims and as Palestinians that Solomon was a Palestinian, a Jew. And as Muslims, we believe in these prophets as well. So jumping into the religious side of things, it's holy for all the same reasons that the Jews feel it's holy. Okay. So there's no difference in terms of what it is. The question is who's controlling it and who's allowed to pray on it and pray in it. Okay. That's the biggest issue.
Let me ask you this: as a Muslim, dude, I'm like the world's worst Muslim. I don't know anything about this religion.
I'm trying my best, but yeah.
Who do you, either personally or maybe the Muslims collectively might even be a better answer, who do the Muslims think Jesus is? Like, who is Jesus to the Muslims? Jesus
to the Muslims is a prophet, a messenger of God. We call it the spirit of, technically Ruh Allah is a term used, even though it's not used in the term that the Christians use as in like the Trinity or anything like that. But we believe that Jesus is going to come back at end times. He is the Messiah. Like, we believe in him as the Messiah as well, and that he is going to come down and fight the Antichrist. All of that is still jives. It's all still the same.
So you guys, this is what is so wild to me. So you guys really believe the exact same thing as Christians do.
Correct.
When it comes to Jesus.
Except the divinity of Jesus, right? We believe that Jesus was not son of God, that God is one, that there is no such thing as a divinity or a trinity of God, that God is one and his oneness, right? So we're more like the Jews in that portion of it, right? That we believe that God is one and eternal, the Alpha, the Omega, has no kids, can't, it's completely outside of a realm of of physicality, right? Of what we believe in reality. And at the same time, we believe that Jesus was sent down by God to bring people back to the true religion, to understand what God is, and that the previous believers, the Jews in this case, were led astray by various practices. Their expulsion into Babylon, they brought back a lot of Babylonian kind of stuff, and the Talmud is Judaism is a very different religion. A lot of Jews may tell Christians, oh, we're just the Old Testament, right? And it's not just that, right? It's a lot more than just the Old Testament. So yeah, that's basically the biggest difference. We believe that the Quran, for example, is the final testament. So if there's the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran would be the final testament. It's a series of books.
Dude, this stuff is so complicated and confusing. Yeah. And I think I know it's on purpose, but I want to summarize that with what I find interesting is the fact that Muslims believe Jesus is the Messiah. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Jewish religion, Judaism, does not believe Jesus is the Messiah. So you would think inherently Christians would not be happy about that. But I think you've got one faction of Christians, and again, let's call them the Christian Zionists or the evangelical Christians, who seem to be okay with that. But then, interestingly enough, you have another faction of Christians, and Tucker Carlson right now, Candace Owens, these are two of the biggest voices in media. And what I see from them, Tucker's a little bit strategic the way he does it. He brings his guests on and he lets them say the quiet things out loud. Candace is just a beast. She just says it the way she says it.
Candace for president, honestly.
Yeah, Candace for president, seriously. But those two, and they have a huge Christian following where they're like, listen, we are against what's happening right now to the Palestinians, because as a Christian, I can't let this happen. And it's so fascinating to me. You've got that faction, but then you've got the other faction of the evangelical Christians, like these pastors, so to speak. And these guys, I mean, you drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza, they'd be okay with it, it seems. So it's really interesting. We'll have to come back to that. Okay. My God, so much I want to talk to you guys.
You might be able to answer this actually, and this might kind of answer your question too, Ray. For example, just near our house, we have one of the stops that Jesus made. It's in a totally Muslim city, a Muslim town, but there's a what's it called? I keep forgetting the name of
the Church of Saint. I don't want to butcher this, but it's, I think, Cleopas or Cleophas. It's in the village of El Kabeba. This is a very ancient town, thousands of years old, and essentially we see this. So this town is across the valley from our town, right? Our town is 8 kilometers from Jerusalem. It's also a very ancient town, a small town, beautiful. Essentially, Christian pilgrims have to make a stop at El Kabeba to visit this church, because what the biblical story, I guess, is that on Jesus' third night of his resurrection, stopped and rested at this church before continuing on his journey. So it has a lot of significance. And mind you, this church is essentially, there's Christians. It's a monastery living in it, taking care of it in the middle of a Muslim town, right? Al Kubeba has probably a few thousand Muslims in it, but they are protected amongst the Muslims. They live side by side in peace and harmony with their Muslim neighbors. And in fact, we see no difference amongst each other, right? If I was to see a church, be desecrated, attacked by, say, a group of Zionist invaders, mobs, I would defend it. I would defend the Christians in it with my life if need be. And the same
doesn't matter if they're Muslims. If ISIS came and tried to attack churches or anything, there's no difference. And that's what I wanted to really point out is, as you mentioned, I'll take it a step further. The Jews, they hate Jesus with a passion, a real passion. And you can,
Ben Shapiro's got 50 videos on the internet that basically says that exact same thing. And he's like one of the biggest spokespeople for that. That's just interesting to me. It's interesting
It's
that
wild.
they hate Jesus like that, and they're not shy about
You
saying
should
it.
see how they treat the Christians in the old city. I mean, Christians walking in the old city. So, for example, you have a lot of Catholics, for example, or Eastern Orthodox. They'll come to walk the Via Dolorosa, which is the path that Jesus took with the crucifix when he was crucified. And so, a lot of Christian pilgrims come to Jerusalem to do that pilgrimage. And as they walk, Jewish Israelis will spit on them. This is a typical thing. This is a normal thing for them. The way that they're treating the Armenians, there's an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem as well. They're all Christians that left during the Armenian genocide. They came to Palestine to seek refuge in Palestine, and the Palestinians obviously opened their doors to them, actually gave them a quarter of the city, renamed a quarter of the city to the Armenian quarter, and they've lived there since then. And now the Israelis are basically taking away their land rights and essentially just going to take away the church's rights in that area. Yeah, it's very interesting. And the best way to put it, I think, from the Christian side, from the Christian Zionist side, is I don't think the Christian Zionists necessarily love the Jews either, because in their perspective, they need to put all the Jews back in Israel, in biblical Israel, in order for Jesus to come down.
Yeah.
And then when he comes down, the Jews will either accept Jesus or they will be destroyed. So they're really kind of a sacrificial lamb.
Biblical.
Yes.
They're sacrificial. That's so wild.
Yeah.
And you're right. That's how I see it as well. They're sacrificial lambs, and they're more supporting it for that biblical prophecy to come true of the end of times. And then dude, that stuff is so wild.
And they're so powerful, man. That's the crazy part. We're talking about people that are in politics. We're talking about people that can make decisions, and they're making these decisions off of their interpretation of these ancient texts, which, don't get me wrong, there's a lot to learn in these ancient texts. There's a lot to respect, but everybody's got their own interpretation of it, and you're affecting people's lives, and generations of people's lives now are being affected.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think Muhammad dropped off. Is he back?
Did he by
Muhammad,
accident?
are you back? Okay. All right, guys, you know what I want to do if you're cool with this? I swear to God, I've so enjoyed this. I think this is amazing. And what I've realized is maybe what we should do next, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of give me your final thoughts on this one question. But again, this is a lot, man. This is a lot. And it's very overwhelming to take this all in. But I think we've done a great job of kind of laying a foundation. What I'd like to do next in terms of the next one is, let's come up with 10 defined questions. And that way on that one, we'll kind of almost be like an interview where I'll ask you the specific questions, because I know there's other things you guys want to talk about that, we're at an hour and 5 minutes, and I kind of like to keep these things right around this. So I don't want to go more on this one. But on the next one, we'll talk about those defined things. What I would like to ask each of you in conclusion is, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen next and now? Obviously, Trump's in power. I've been very disappointed personally in how he's been dealing with this. Some people are like, dude, you don't know what he's doing. He's playing 4-dimensional chess, and it's all going to work out. I don't see that right now. And again, I like to consider myself kind of a 4-dimensional chess person, so I don't see that. So, Bilal, why don't we start with you? Where do you think this is going, and what's going to happen?
Man, that's a big question. I think if everything were to continue in the manner that it is right now, I think things are going to get worse before they get better. I think what we're starting to head into, or what we're moving towards, is a defragmentation and a kind of, or I should say, a fragmentation of the society, the post-World War II society. International laws and norms are being kind of obliterated, and this sets precedents for other countries. The idea of what a nation state is and what it's all changing very rapidly. And so I think to some degree, the sins of our fathers are coming back to haunt us. And I specifically am talking about the British and the French and the Sykes-Picot agreements, and how they kind of split up without considering ethnic backgrounds or religious backgrounds of that entire area. You got, for example, the Kurds don't have a country, right? But they're split up amongst 3 countries. You got Sunnis and Shiites, you've got Christians, and you've got Jews, and you've got a bunch of others, and there was no rhyme or reason how they kind of, and so it's almost as if this is all kind of changing things in a very rapid manner, and unfortunately in a bloody manner, and I think that that's probably going to continue happening at least for a while until things kind of subside and resettle. Ideally, I think what will happen over time is people are still people. People want to live peacefully. People want to have their kids grow up in a peaceful society where they're able to go to school and have a life and get married and have a job and all that good stuff. And that's not any different for Palestinians or Israelis, right? They're all the same in that case. And I think that to some degree, one of the things that the Israelis have done for so long is to try to keep people separated from each other in order for them not to mingle and not to realize the humanness of everyone. And I think that that's the first thing that has to go. That's the first thing that needs to go away in order for things to heal. So I guess if I wanted to kind of put it in my perspective, I would love to see one country, one people, or I should say a binational country where they over time will begin to melt it. Look, we all like the same food and they steal words from us and we steal words from them. We're practically halfway there. So at this point, it's just put them all in the same place and give them all the same rights and citizenship. And I know that looks really far off right now, but I feel like that's the only way things will kind of subside and become peaceful, I guess.
I gotcha. No, totally. But you know what's interesting? I mean, yes, it is a war hawk administration and they're doing things that seem insane. At the same time, though, some people are like, and I'm kind of one of them, I'm like, okay, could it be plausible that Trump aligns himself with BRICS? He aligns himself with Russia and China. I mean, hell, half of America thinks Trump and Putin are like boys, and he thinks Trump's Putin's puppet. So maybe he is moving. This is a whole nother thread. It's like, is he moving away from the alliance with Europe
NATO.
And the alliance with NATO to ally with BRICS and ally with China and Russia?
No.
But then the question becomes, where does Iran fit in that? Where does North Korea fit in that? Because those are 2 countries that are copacetic and kumbaya with Russia and China. So if Trump is really, let's give him the benefit of the doubt for a second and say he's playing 4D chess and he's moving away from NATO, he's moving away from England, Russia, England, France, Germany, Canada. He's like, screw these guys. These guys are leftists. They're too progressive in how they want to do things. And I'm going to move toward, BRICS and move toward that. I mean, that would be insane if that's what he's really doing. But then the question is, where does Iran fit into that? Where does Israel fit into that? And where do Iran and Israel fit into that? I think Saudi Arabia fits in anywhere because those guys are like, they'll do whatever is in their best interest and they don't really have alliances or allegiances to anybody. But man, it is interesting. It is interesting. You guys are awesome, man. I know there's so much more we wanted to talk about, but if you're okay with this, let's kind of wrap today here. We're at about an hour and 15 minutes. I know I'm going to get a lot of questions as well that come in. And then I think between the questions that come in and then the 3 of us, I would love to do a follow-up actually pretty soon, if that's okay with you guys, where we do talk about the specific question issues. And that one will be a lot less me yapping and it'll be me asking you guys your opinion. Is that cool?
That's totally fine. Yeah, no, Ray, I had a great time. Thank you so much. You made this easy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And believe it or not, everybody, this is Bilal's first podcast interview. I mean, the dude is going to go from me to Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and then I'll be like, hey, Bilal, can you come back on? And he'll be like, dude, what?
I will be here. Hey,
I'm already over your level.
Ray, we've developed a relationship. You're not getting rid of me anymore. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. This has been great because, again, it's so wonderful to have you both. First of all, I love the fact you're brothers because I'm ridiculously close with my brother. So that's incredibly cool for me. But secondly, the different perspectives of, what you bring and then what Muhammad brings with the military stuff. Muhammad, I really enjoyed the way you ended that segment with talking about the different allegiances and what's going on in this game of Risk. So we can dive into that later. All right, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I have. I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but I hope you did. And the Daoud brothers are going to be back. You guys stay on the line. If you didn't get anything from this podcast, which I'm sure you got a million things from this podcast, call a spade the way these two guys do and the way hopefully I do. And we're going to keep our learning going, and let me know any questions because I'm going to schedule a follow-up with these guys hopefully within the next week. All right, everybody. Stay on the line, boys.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at